Hello everyone, good morning. I'm sharing my screen. Yes, we'll discuss the enterprise structure with a use case. Okay, and we are basically starting off with core HR module today. And remember, whenever you implement Fusion HCM for any client, remember there are many modules given by Oracle in HCM, like global HR, payroll, goals management, performance management, absence management, profiles. Clients can pick and choose what modules they want to implement in Fusion HCM. But there's one module that they definitely have to implement, which is a global HR. Okay, and the way we go about all these modules is, on day one, I typically give you an overview of what that module is all about. And for the next few days, we do the configurations of that module. Like if you take global HR, we'll talk about what configurations are required to set up a global HR module, and same for payroll or other modules as well. I'll give you an overview on day one. The next few days, we do the configurations in the application, and we don't stop there. We will go a step further and we will see how client will be using those modules after we configure them. Okay, we will also see the end result of it. Like say, for example, after we implement global HR, I'll show you how client will use a global HR configurations that you have done to do a variety of transactions. Like after you do a global HR configurations, you should be able to hire people into the application. You should be able to transfer people. You should be able to carry out a variety of transactions. So we'll see how to perform all of them with the configurations that we have done. And the same applies for other modules as well. So when we do a payroll, module, what do? We will do all the configurations, and at the end of it, we will also execute a payroll as well. We will do a couple of runs to see how the system will actually be used by the client. So if you also look at the other side of it, like how exactly the system will be used by the client, you will be in a much better position to understand next time you do the configurations. You will understand how exactly it shows up to the client, the configuration that you're doing. Okay, and also it gives you a holistic perspective of each and every module. Okay, that's how we proceed with it. And we will start off with enterprise structure today, and I'll try to explain it with the help of a use case. Okay, let's say you're working for a fictional enterprise. Okay, let's give it a name. Since we are configuring this enterprise in Fusion, we call it as Infusion Corporation or Infusion Enterprise. But you can replace this Infusion with any company that you can think of. You can replace it with Apple, Google, or Reliance or Tata. Whatever company that comes to your mind, you can replace Infusion with that. So since we're configuring this enterprise in Fusion, I call this fictional enterprise as Infusion Corporation. And assume that it's an MNC for which you have to implement Fusion HCM, and their business is to build air quality monitoring products. Okay, assume that it's a manufacturing firm, and it's an MNC, and you have to implement HCM for Infusion Corporation. And a couple of more lines about it. They have operations in US and UK. Okay, assume that they have their headquarters in US. And they have major operations in UK as well, but they do have smaller outlets in a few other countries as well, like France, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. Okay, and when you get the requirement, right, or even before you start configuring HCM modules, not necessarily you, but it would be the functional track lead who have at least 10 to 15 years of experience. They sit down with the client. They try to understand the client's business process, or what exactly they try to do all the required background work related to the modules or the way they needs to be configured. Okay, so they would probably ask the client the right questions. They might ask them, how many in what countries do you employ people? Okay, so Yes, in US, in Fusion Corporation employs a number of people and they have revenue of Y million dollars. And outside of US as well, the company does employ people and they do also have revenue coming in from outside of US. So a revenue is not so important for us as a HCM specialist. This may probably matter for financial consultants, but this is important for us. So yes, Infusion employs people in US and other entities as well. Okay, and what does that mean? That means to you and me, yes, if you have to hire people into the application, we should implement global HR and do the required setups. Now you can come back and say, if this is an enterprise structure that you get, then you will probably come up with a few bullet points like this. Like whenever you configure enterprise structure in Fusion HCM, let me quickly show you what setup options are available in HCM. Okay, so when we configure a global HR, when we configure global HR, these are the typical setups that you do. Okay, the screenshot that you're seeing to configure a global HR module, these are the actual setups that you do in HCM application. And not all these setups, yes, they are grouped into buckets, or logical buckets. And for some tasks, you have asterisks, which means you might or might not have to do that configuration for all the clients. Say, for example, if you take this managed disability organizations, you might have to do it for a client if they have any people with disability working for them, or if they don't have any, then you don't need to do this particular task. So yes, if you have to implement global HR in HCM, these are the tasks that you can perform. And typically, and if you look at these tasks, you have some terms like enterprise, legal entity, business units, and you also have in the enterprise and legal entity, you also have an optional configuration here. You have an optional configuration called divisions here. So you have enterprise, legal entity, divisions, business units, locations, organizations, etc. So these are the terms that you should get used to, right? So when you get a requirement from a client, okay, and they give you they tell you a few points like this about the company, then you can probably design your enterprise in this particular fashion. So what does it say? It says a company has operations in US, UK, and 3 other countries, right? So first of all, in Fusion, even before you do anything, you need to first set up the enterprise. Setting enterprise is a step number 1. Okay, where do you do it from? There are 2 ways to configure enterprise. I'll explain those 2 ways in a moment. Of what those 2 ways. You have something called as enterprise structure configurator. Okay, that's basically a tool or interview, a sort of a tool wherein you fill in information. At the end of it, enterprise structure gets created. Or you can go into these individual tasks and you can do the enterprise configuration and other configurations as well. Just close this to avoid confusion. Not this one, this one. So in this particular case, you can open up the Excel sheet. Okay. So in this case, the first thing that you have to do is, yes, you need to create enterprise in HCM. You need to create enterprise in HCM. And you will call it as Infusion. And the enterprise is at the top, it sits at the top. And it is also called as Ultimate Holding Company. Some people refer to it with a shortcut as well. Don't get confused, UHC. And when they say UHC, they are talking about Ultimate Holding Company or the enterprise. So you need to set up enterprise at the top first. And under the enterprise, the next level that you can have is a divisions. Remember, these divisions are optional configurations. They are not used directly in the configurations in HCM. They are purely optional configuration. Okay, and yes, we can have three logical divisions here, because if you go back to the use case, it said the company had operations in US, UK, and in UK they had operations in France, or maybe in and you have operations in Saudi Arabia and UAE. So you can put Saudi Arabia and UAE under a Middle East division. You can put France under UK. Okay, France and UK legal entity, you can put it under a division called Europe. And you can have another division called US. And under US, you can put in the US related configuration. Remember, these divisions are purely optional configurations. You don't tag them or use them in any HCM related configurations, but you can use them when you create organization trees so that you can control a data access at a division level. So for example, if you want to give a particular user access to all the organizations that fall under that particular division, only in that scenario, divisions will be helpful. In such case, what you can do, you can create an organization tree, put in enterprise at the top, or division at the bottom of it, and after division you put in legal entities under that division. BUs related to that division, you can put them beneath it, and you can create an organization tree with a top level unit as Europe, and you can assign that or use that organization tree when you create a security profile, so that when you assign that security profile with a division equal to Europe to someone, they get to see all the information that is beneath them. Okay, they get to see all the data from legal entities, business units, and the departments under that. Okay, so that's the only purpose a division serve. You can probably use them to grant data access to the users, and it's purely optional configuration, and not many clients use them. Okay, so you have enterprise at the top, divisions beneath that. And in this particular case, we can have three divisions: US, Europe, and Middle East. Right, and under each and in each country, remember, it also mentions, or as you can see here, it clearly says that they have operations in US, UK, France, KSA. KSA stands for Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and that's how we refer to Saudi Arabia, and UAE. And in all in US and outside of US, there are people working for Fusion company. So which means you should be able to hire people in Fusion HCM application, which means you should be able to hire people in Fusion HCM application. And for you to be able to hire people in Fusion HCM application, what is the first thing that you have to do? If you have to hire people, you go into My Client Groups, you click on New Person. You try to hire an employee. When you try to hire an employee, remember, what is the first thing that you have to do? You need to select a business unit. Sorry, you need to select a legal employer. You need to select a legal employer. And without a legal employer, you cannot hire employees. And what exactly do you see in a legal employer? It is nothing but a legal entity which have been enabled as legal employers. Okay, so if I take you to another page, so yes, for you to be able to hire people in all these countries, you need to have legal entity set up. You need to have legal entity set up. And what exactly is a legal entity? So this is like you registering your firm as a legal organization in that country, so that you can carry out business in a legal bound manner. Okay, and to carry out business transactions and or to do the job or to do your business, you would of course need people to execute those day-to-day tasks. And for you to be able to hire people or to do business within a country, you should register your company as a legal entity. Okay, and yes, since this Fusion Corporation wants to or needs to hire people in 5 different countries, we need to have legal entity created in each and every country, in all those 5 countries. And how do you create a legal entity? So you go into FSM. Remember, we're going to go into each and every task in quite detail later on as well. But I'm just trying to explain you how this fits into a Fusion HCM. So now I go into global search, or I don't have to go into global search. I'll just select workforce deployment here. And you go to legal structures. And here I have an option to create a new legal entity. I won't create a new one, but let me show you how it looks like after you create it. So yes, in this particular screen, you define a legal entity. And remember, when we do the configurations, we might use terms like UK legal entity, US legal entity, or France legal entity. But in real time, when you implement this to the client, you would plug in. So the client would give you what is the exact registered company name that they have in France, KSA, UAE, US, and UK. Okay, so you don't, when you do the implementation for the end client, you don't create a legal entities with these names. You don't create legal entities with these names, US legal entity, UK, or France. Instead of US legal entity, you will plug in the actual name of the legal entity there. So in our case, the company that I registered for is Gigs Software Solutions Private Limited. Okay, so this is the company that I registered for my firm. And why do I have to do it? Because I run business in India and I pay taxes for it. I pay GST and there is a TDS involved. And I also have a few employees working for the firm. And for me to be able to do all of this, I had to register my firm as a private limited company with Government of India or with MCA, right? And when if I probably implement HCM, yes, if you are implementing HCM for me, you don't create a legal entity as US legal entity or India legal entity. Instead, it would be the exact legal name. This is the legal name with which I registered my firm. It would be this exact name that you plug in here. Okay, so you say Gigs Software Solutions Private Limited. And if you have if you have a different name with which you registered a company in UK and France, if it's the same name, maybe with small changes, or it could be, yeah, you give in the actual firm name. That's what I mean to highlight here. Okay. And yes, when we do the configurations, we might be creating those configurations referring to the countries, referring to the country names, but it would be the actual company name that you plug in there. Okay. And yes, for me to be able to hire people, I had to first register the company. And when I register a company, they give me a couple of identifiers. But first of all, when I register a company or after I register a company, I will be able to hire people into my company, right? And if I implement HCM, I would come into this particular screen, the legal entity screen. First of all, I create an enterprise called Gigs, and within that, I will start creating a legal entity. So I create Gigs India Private Limited. That's a legal entity I have registered in India. And there would be an identifier as well that would be assigned for my company. There is a short code assigned as well. I think it's UNOG, and there are a few more characters there. A short code is also given by government. And it's like you don't enter what details you like here. Instead, you enter the exact company details of the client into these screens. So so in this case, so companies are running operations for many years now. It's just that they want to get into HCM now, or it's just that they want to implement HCM. So whatever companies, registered companies they have, and whatever identifiers they have for those registered companies, you get all that information and you just fill it in here. And for every company, you would have an address with which you might have probably registered the company, right? So you would create a legal address with that address first, and then when you create a legal entity, you tag it. Of course, we discuss all of this when we do the global HR configurations. And after you create a legal entity, remember, there could be two reasons why you might be creating legal entity, right? Remember what I mentioned in the introduction session, some clients might use Fusion Cloud to only implement financials. They might not want to use HCM in it. In which case, yes, they still have to create legal entity, because at the end of the year, they have to do a reporting. They have to do a reporting to the government. They have to do a year-end reporting, basically. They have to show what is the revenue that they have earned, expenses, and they have to pay taxes as well, right? So to do all of that, even though a company doesn't employ people in a particular country, there are few scenarios as well like that, in which case, or they do have people, but they don't want to maintain them in Fusion Cloud. It could also very well be possible, right? Because they might be using another product. Okay, maybe they use instead of HCM, I'm not able to recollect the competitor names. They might be using some other system from some other vendor to manage employees. In which case, also you have to create a legal entity, but you will not enable this checkbox called legal employer. So if you create a legal entity, and if you want your client to be able to hire people into that legal entity, you need to enable this checkbox called legal employer. So when you go to hire an employee, you see a list of legal entities you configured in the application. And what exactly is a legal entity? It is nothing but a company that you register to be able to, it's a legal firm that you register with the government in the country that you want to operate in. And you will typically have one legal entity per country, unless you go ahead and acquire another company. Okay, so in which case, say for example, if you're I have one company under my name, and tomorrow if I take over, or if I buy over another institute, that also will come under me, right? But that might also be a legal entity, or that might also be a registered firm. So in which case, I'll have two legal entities in a single country. But in usual scenario, they'll have only one legal entity. But if an enterprise has multiple companies operating, or multiple registered companies operating in a single country, so multiple legal firms, in which case you might have multiple legal entities like this, US one legal entity and US two, or in a usual scenario, it will be one per country. Okay, and in the legal employer, you will only see the legal entities. You see list of legal entities here, right? You will only see this legal entity in this particular drop down, for whom this checkbox is enabled. The legal employer checkbox is enabled. So what does that mean? That means, yes, when you create a legal entity, only if you say that yes, they are legal employers, and they also do a payroll statutory reporting, or they do a payroll tax reporting. So only such legal entities will appear in the drop down when you want to hire people. So yes, in this particular case, yes, Infusion wants to hire people in 5 different countries. So what does that mean? That means I have to create 5 legal entities, one in each country. And in each country, there are no exceptions to this. If you want to hire people, you definitely need to have a legal entity configured. And not only just to hire people, even if you had to do business, you would definitely have to need to have a legal entity configured, because if you're not a registered legal firm, you cannot operate in that particular country, any country for that matter. Okay, and you define legal entities, and that alone is not sufficient. Since we have to hire people into that legal entity, we need to enable these checkboxes in the application. We say that these legal firms are legal employers and PSUs. Okay, and you enable it on all the legal entities. And what does that mean? The moment you do these setups, from that point onwards, you will be able to hire people into the legal entity. Now, after that, beneath the legal entity, so you have enterprise, ultimate holding company at the top. You can have optional configuration of divisions, which would help you only from security standpoint. And then you have a legal entity configuration, which is a key. And under legal entities, you have business units. And these business units are, this is typically an organization, and all the business transactions, right, typically happen at this level. So for example, if you take this particular company, what do they do? It says that they manufacture air quality monitoring products, right? So since they are air quality monitoring product builder, what would they need to do the build? Of course, they would need some raw materials, and they would probably buy raw materials from the suppliers, and that raw materials have to be run through a manufacturing process for you to get air quality products as an outcome. And then they probably sell air quality products to the customers. So at least on a bare minimum, these would be the three tasks that would be involved in the operations of Infusion. And remember, I've mentioned these modules at a very high level. Like if you have to buy raw materials from suppliers, what is it? What is the module that you have to implement? You need to implement financials, and you need to implement supplier invoicing module. Supplier invoicing, or in other words, it's called as accounts payable module, wherein you buy raw materials from a supplier and you pay for what you have bought. Okay, and even for buying raw material from a supplier, you might also have to implement a procurement module, wherein you say you send out a PO to the supplier asking him to supply ABC items in that particular warehouse by so and so date. Okay, and after you receive them, you run them through the manufacturing cycle. After that, you sell them out. And then you might also probably, when you sell the product, you might have to implement order management module as well, and shipping, etc. Right. So, and after the product is sold, the customer would have to make a payment. So you need to do a customer invoicing in the application. You create an AR invoice, send it out to customer and say, boss, this is what you have bought from us, and you need to pay this much amount by so and so date. So depending on the business process, or depending on the business of the company that they do in each business unit, you can implement the modules that they need. Okay, so if you talk about business units, from the actual business transaction standpoint, this is what typically happen at a business unit level. If you talk about them from financials or SCM module standpoint, but we are more inclined towards HCM here, right? So to carry out these transactions, okay, you might not do everything from each business unit, or that's okay. But if you have to look at this business units from assignment or from a HCM standpoint, for you to be able to do these operations, do the supplier invoicing or manufacturing, customer invoicing or order management, etc., you of course need people, right? And what do you need? You need people to do all these activities. And what do you do? So that's, and for you to be able to help you on, and for you to be able to hire people, first of all, you register legal entity, and then you start hiring people into that legal entity. And that's what you see here as well, right? So that's step number one when you try to hire people. Okay, you hire people into a legal entity. But after you hire a people, after you define a legal firm, after you register a legal firm in HCM, you will be able to hire people into that particular legal entity. And let me just do one thing here. I'll just quickly go to employment information tab. And remember, this is quite an important page, and we will see all the fields, or we'll talk about all the options that you see in this train pages in quite detail later on. But I just want to take you quickly to employment information tab so that I can show you how we create an assignment for this particular employee. Okay, let's say I'm hiring this person. You ignore it. I'm hiring this person in US legal entity, and after I hire him, I cannot fill in anything here. In the employment information, when you hire a person, of course, you hire him to do a particular job. So it could be a sales consultant that you are hiring. You put him into a job, and you let him occupy a specific position within it. So you might put him, it could be a sales executive whom you put in you probably put them in sales executive position, and the job could also be sales executive. You put him in a grade, you assign him to a sales department based out of New York, or maybe based out of London. And you hire another person, but that person should be working in manufacturing department. So you assign him to manufacturing department and you assign him to a relevant job and a position. So what do? When you hire people into these companies, yes, the legal employer would be the firm that you have registered. Okay, that company will roll out offer letter to the employees. But when they actually join, what is it that they do? You create an assignment for them. When you hire an employee, you expect them to do something, right? So you assign them to a business unit. So if this employee is supposed to work in a US business unit, if a specific employee is supposed to work in US business unit, let's say you are hiring John, then what do? You create an assignment in US one business unit. Okay. And then what do? You will also put him into a department. So if this person is supposed to work in sales department, you say sales. If this person is supposed to work in operations department, you put him in operations. If he's supposed to work in a marketing department, you put in marketing department. So depending on in which department, what job, of what location, what is the position that he needs to occupy, how much, what's the grade that you have hired him in, whether it's a full-time or a regular job, all such details you plug in here at the assignment level. So yes, you when you hire people into it, depending on in what team they need to work for, you will create an assignment at the business unit level. You hire people at a legal employer level, but when you assign work for them or when you create an assignment for the person, you do it at a business unit level, because that is where they do the actual work. Okay, they don't work at a legal entity level, they work at a business unit level. They get assigned to a specific department within a business unit, and then it could be a sales, marketing, manufacturing, or procurement. And depending on the assignment that is assigned for them, they would go about performing their job. Okay, so you have enterprise, divisions, legal entities, business units. This is where all the business unit, all the transactions happen. And when you hire people, you hire them at legal entity level. But when you create assignments, you do it at business unit level. And if you have got multiple business units in a country, and if your employer follows a you have an option to configure multiple assignments for employees as well. Sometimes you might have employees working for 2 business units. They might do a full-time job as in one business unit. Maybe on and off, they might also provide services to another business unit on a temporary basis. In which case, you can create 2 assignments with 2 different business units if you have. And then you have few more configurations involved down the line, wherein you have departments, jobs, positions, right? So whenever you hire a person, you put him into a department. You assign a location for him, right? And or you assign a work location, and you put him into a specific job. He could be a sales executive. He could be a manufacturing consultant, right? So yes, after you get the requirement from a client, you define enterprise structure like this. Remember, I only had 3 or 4 levels in the enterprise structure here. This is not all. When you define, when you configure global HR in HCM, these would be the setups that you have to do. So after you do the configurations in the application, it would probably look like this. You have Fusion Corporation at the top, Ultimate Holding Company. You have divisions beneath that, and under divisions you have legal entity configured so that they can roll out offer letters and employ people in it. And then you also define business units so that the actual business transactions can be carried out. And even for HCM also, you need business units because that's where you create assignment set. And you have departments as well beneath that. Okay, so we discussed all of this already. And if you look at the core HR setup sequence, if you want to implement core HR or global HR, these are the setups that you have to perform, and you typically go about them in the same sequence. You first do the enterprise and legal entity configuration, and then you go ahead and create a business units. And there is something called as reference data sets as well. But I didn't talk about it so far. We will discuss it in detail when we reach that particular stage. Right, so you define enterprise and legal entity, and the related configurations. Then you create business units, and then you define locations and organizations. And what comes under organizations? What exactly is a location? Location is like you registering address in Fusion Cloud. So you capture address as a location, and then you attach that location to the departments, so that when you attach department to a person, the location would automatically flow there. See, whenever you create these organizations, right? So if you have to create a legal entity, you have to create a legal address. And when you had to create a division or a department in HCM, you have to definitely mention where it is located, right? So, and for which you need to create locations first. And then you can use that locations when you create a division or a department or a disability organization, etc. Right? And whenever you hire persons, of course, there are two bits in the compensation part, right? So you mentioned that maybe 40,000 or 60,000 is going to be the salary basis, or 60,000 is going to be your basic pay per year. Okay, assume that the candidate is working in US, he is eligible for, or you mentioned what is the basic pay that you're going to give him. So if it's 60,000 per year, you create a salary basis, and the salary basis would be based on the configuration that you do in salary basis, that the basic pay component for an employee would be determined. So if it's 60,000 per year, it would be 5,000 per month. And on top of it, if the employee is eligible for any additional allowances, yes, they would also be paid along with it. So the salary basis would basically determine what is his base compensation going to be, okay, excluding allowances. And yes, we will do this configuration at a very high level, a compensation related one. But when we do the payroll, we talk about all of this in quite detail, like what exact payroll elements do we need to configure, earnings and deduction elements, etc. And we will also see how we can restrict the salary that you can pay to an employee based on a grade. So, for example, if you, I'm not sure how many of you can relate to this, but when you look at government job ads, they would clearly mention whether it is a grade 3 officer or grade 2 or grade 1. So from the grade itself, people can easily make out what could be the salary range. And even in that ads also, they would clearly mention that this is the maximum pay applicable for grade 2 officer, and this job is an opening for it. Right? So you can create grades, assign rates to it, and ladder is like putting one grade beneath the other, so that when you try to promote an employee, a person from one grade can be moved into the next grade, logical advancement, you can say. And the grade and grade rate would help you to restrict the amount that can be paid out to a particular person under a salary basis. So when you hire a person, in the employment information tab, you select a grade. And when you go to compensation tab, this is where you select a salary basis. And a combination of those two will determine, or in the salary basis itself, you assign a grade rate, and that would determine what is the range that you can pay for that particular person whom you're hiring in a specific grade. So if the range is 60,000 to 80,000 per year, you cannot breach that range. Okay, and of course you can decide what needs to happen if the HR specialist is not giving them a salary within that range. You can control all of it in the compensation. And remember, when you hire a person, you don't do it just for the sake of it, right? You would hire a person into a specific job. You would hire him to do a specific job. So you might hire a HR specialist, you might hire a HR analyst, or you might hire you might hire an operations consultant, you might hire a sales executive, you might hire a marketing executive, right? You might hire an HCM consultant as well, or IT consultant. So yes, you hire people and you put them into a specific job, or you might hire a network analyst. So when you hire people, you put them into a specific job. And for a job, whenever there is a vacancy, what usually happens is you create a position in HCM first. A position is nothing but occurrence of a job, or it's a way of creating a vacancy for a job in HCM. Like when you ask someone if there is any opportunity, you don't ask them if they have a job. the right word to use is you ask them if they have any open positions for HCM consultant. Position is nothing but a vacancy or opening for a specific job. So yes, when we do the configurations for jobs and positions, we look at how you can create job families. Job families is like grouping jobs together. You define jobs, positions, and in the old versions, we had an option to create position trees. We don't have that anymore, right? So if you have to, or over the next few days, or at least 7 to 10 days, we will be going through these core HR setups. We'll be performing all these setups. We'll do them in the same sequence. And we go through the same buckets. If it's a purely optional configuration, we might skip it. And when you have to define a core HR, right? When you have to do a core HR setups, one obvious way is I can get into a functional setup manager screen. And I can go into individual work areas or individual offerings here. Say, for example, since we are doing global HR, most of the global HR related setups would be available in workforce deployment. So I select workforce deployment here so that I get to see all the global HR related configurations. So I can create users, set up enterprise structures first, legal structures, and then organization structures. Organization structures means enterprise and legal entity comes under enterprise and legal. Organization structures means business units and reference data sets. Then you have workforce structures. Workforce structures means you get all this, the jobs and positions, etc. And if you go into organization structures, you will also have the locations, organizations, business units, all of them will come under this. So when you go into any functional area, remember only the required tasks will appear, right? If you change it to all tasks, you will be able to see all the options available. We're going to workforce structures. I think it shows up here. Yeah. So you see, you've got all these options or configurations available under a workforce structures. You can create those locations, divisions, departments, etc. Whatever you have seen here, locations and organizations, and jobs and positions as well. And organization structures, you get to see the business unit related configurations. So one way to do the global HR setups is, and that is what we do in real time as well. You get into FSM, you select the offering, and you get into individual screens, individual work areas, and you go ahead and perform these tasks or setups, right? So I can search for manage enterprise HCM information here. Okay, and manage enterprise HCM information is available under workforce structure. So that is the first task that I need to do. I need to capture HCM information at enterprise level first. And then I go to manage legal address. What do I do after that? I go into legal structures, manage legal address. I will register the legal address of the company here. And then I go ahead and create a legislative data group and a legal entity. So you have legal entity here. You can also search for legislative data group. So this way, you search for all the setup tasks that you see here in the application. You go ahead and configure them. Okay, and this is how we do the core HR setups. And apart from this, there is one other option to quickly configure enterprise structures. Okay, so we have something called as enterprise structure configurator. We have something called as enterprise structure configurator. We call it as ESC. People refer to this in shortcut as ESC, which stands for enterprise structure configurator. So this is like it's a sort of a tool. Okay, it's a sort of an interview-based tool. Let's say, for example, this is how the enterprise structure configurator is going to look like. We're going to see this tomorrow. When you use enterprise structure configurator, when you start off with it, it will ask you to enter the information in each of these tabs. So you see this train page. So when you access enterprise structure configurator, you will have a train page like this, wherein you enter all the information that you want to configure. You enter divisions you want to configure, legal entities, business units, reference data sets, locations, etc. And you enter information in each of these tabs. And at the end of it, what would happen? at the end of it. So this is how you start filling in information. So this is step number 1 in ESC, Enterprise Structure Configurator tool. And how do you access it? We'll see that in tomorrow's session. You need to go to FSM and search for Establish Enterprise Structure task. And when you access it, it will ask you to enter the information required for enterprise configuration. You enter the enterprise details, the legal entity, the main legal entity, and then the location. And after that, you can enter all the information into these tabs required for a client. So you go to each and every tab and you enter the required information, legal entity, business units, RDS, etc. And after you do all of this, what will the tool do? The tool would give you a results. And when you look at the results, right, you will be able to see the enterprise structure configured in Fusion HCM. Enterprise structure configured in Fusion HCM. So you see enterprise, you see the divisions, and under the divisions, you see legal entities with all the information configured. And what is even important is this management reporting structure. So in a quick 1 hour session, or even if you do it in real time, it won't take more than an hour. So if clients initially, right, when we do CRP sessions or when we do the initial requirement gathering sessions, clients might not know or might not be able to visualize the enterprise structures that we're going to configure for them. So they might ask us, can you configure a sample structure in HCM enterprise structure, a sample enterprise structure, and show them how it looks like. So in such case, what we do is, because they would always have confusion like whether they need to have divisions or not, or if they have divisions, how will the enterprise structure looks like? What will be the hierarchy of the enterprise structure? And they would have questions around that. So to clear out all those questions, what we do is, as a functional consultants, we will quickly pull out an enterprise structure in this particular interview-based tool. Interview-based tool means you have a list of train pages. You go into each page, enter the information. And after you enter the information, you get the results like this, the interview results. And you also have a reporting structure or a graph generated with enterprise structure. And you get into a meeting with the client and you show them, so this is how your enterprise is going to look like in HCM, right? And this is how the enterprise is going to look like in HCM. So you configure UHC divisions, and when you click on division, there would be a business units under that division opening up. And under business units, you have departments. So you show this to them, and if they're happy with the configuration, that's fine. And if they want one business unit to be moved into another one, or if they want any changes, or if they want divisions to be taken off, you can make those changes real quick. And the biggest advantage with this ESC is Enterprise Structure Configurator tool is, yes, you can use it to establish enterprise structure real quick, pull out a graph, get the consent from a client. But another important point is, after you configure it, or after you enter all the details, you do have an option to load the enterprise configuration, right? So when you hit this load button, what would happen? All the configurations that you entered in that particular enterprise, like what enterprise you configured, what divisions, what business units, so all of them get loaded into the application when you hit this button. And remember, you will be able to do this for only one enterprise. Remember, a single Fusion Cloud application, a single Fusion Cloud instance should be used only by one enterprise. You cannot have multiple companies, multiple enterprises using the same instance. That's not possible. And it's done for obvious reasons, right? Otherwise, you end up with clients sharing the Fusion Cloud instance, right? So you can have only one enterprise configured in one Fusion Cloud application for obvious reasons. And you can load the configuration quickly after you configure it. And once the configuration is loaded, the main advantage with it is, if client says they're not okay with the configuration, and if you have not created any transactions in the configurations you loaded through that enterprise configuration, see, you created legal entities and you would have loaded business units, right? So if you have probably not hired any people into that legal entity, or if you have not carried out any business transactions in that business unit, you do have an option to roll back configuration. So you can quickly roll back configuration. You configure it, show it to the client. If he says yes, load it in. And then you also show them the individual configurations in the application. If they're not happy with it, you can roll it back. But remember, when you do a rollback, what would happen? All the legal entities, business units that are loaded through this particular configuration would be rolled back, and you won't be able to find them in the application anymore. And what's the benefit with that? The benefit is I can quickly tweak the enterprise structure as per the client requirement, and then I can reload another configuration. So this enterprise configuration tool, right, ESC, it is basically a tool that's used to, so if you load in the configuration, say for example, if you have these many BUs configured, if you go into manage business unit screen, after you load the configuration, you will be able to find them. And if they say no, they don't need a business unit in one country, then what you can do, you can roll back the configuration. And after you roll back the configuration, you get a message like this. Like, yes, we're going to roll it back. You will get a warning. And if you go ahead and say yes, after you roll it back, if you go to manage business unit screen and search for the BUs again, you won't probably find them. And remember, this enterprise structure configurator tool, it is not how you do the setups. It is a sort of a tool that we use during the initial requirement gathering sessions to quickly configure a structure of an enterprise and display it to the client. When we do the actual configurations, how do we go about it? We go about the setups. We do the setups by going into each and every task that you see in the screenshot. So when you do a global HR implementation or core HR implementation, initial requirement gathering sessions, you might use ESC to quickly pull out an enterprise structure, but you roll it back, and this is you go into each and every task that you see on the sheet to implement global HR. Okay, so tomorrow we'll see how to load enterprise structure using ESC, and after that, the next few sessions, 7 to 8 sessions or more, we will see how to configure the various configuration tasks that you have seen in that sheet by going into individual setup tasks. Any questions, guys, in what we have covered today? Any questions from anyone? Okay, I'll take it as no. Thank you, guys. See you tomorrow, and we will see how ESC works.